back now with our roundtable, joined by our chief foreign correspondent, Terry Moran, also New York Times White House correspondent, Maggie Haberman, also an analyst with CNN, Roland Martin, host and managing editor of NewsOne Now, and Republican strategist Sara Fagan, also contributes to CNBC. Terry, let me begin with you. You spend most of your time in London. The White House sending out that bomb to London this week as well, embracing the idea that British intelligence spied on President Trump. What went down there?
Bewilderment and fury. It was a surreal thing to cover from the British end, because the first thing was that this spy agency, which never speaks, not only did they speak, they spoke in the most undiplomatic terms. Utter nonsense, ridiculous, don't believe it. And then when they got the contrition calls, the apology calls that weren't apologies from the White House and from General McMaster's, that was strange, because the first thing they did was call reporters up and say, they've apologized, we're moving on from here, like good allies should. And then an hour later, when the White House apparently, men don't apologize or something, real men don't apologize, said we aren't apologizing, they had to change their story.
And Maggie Haberman, you've been covering President Trump for a long time. You know, in Trump world, I guess you do not apologize. You have a piece in the Times this morning talking about, though, how these tweets and other self-inflicted wounds are getting in the way of his agenda. Do you see any movement, and if you're watching Chris Ruddy today, you don't, on how the president's going to get out from under this?
No, I mean, I think that you're seeing a couple of things here. One is the we don't apologize syndrome that he has had as long as we have known him, which doesn't really work in a White House. It worked for him in the campaigns, does not translate to a government. Trump is very, very frustrated by the Russia issue and the questions about collusion.
And the leaks,
and the leaks are driving him crazy. He has, you know, long enforced non-disclosure agreements on his own employees as a private businessman. Obviously cannot do that with a larger government bureaucracy. I think that has been frustrating to him, and he's used to being able to use his Twitter feed to sort of change the story and push people somewhere else. So I think what you are seeing, is that he keeps trying to do that, but it's a boomerang that comes back and hits him in the head every time.
But if he's frustrated, stop lying. No, he said throughout. He said, oh, no business, no dealings there. His own son says millions pouring in. He then says, no, I didn't meet with anybody. Then we have proof he met with the Russian ambassador. Flynn, no talks. Now, do we have talks? He was being paid by Turkey, $34,000 speech in Russia. This is very simple, Mr. President. You and your team stop lying about Russia, then folks might be able to move on.
What happens after Comey?
Well, at a minimum, stop inflaming an issue that clearly the Intelligence Committee does not believe. No one in the intelligence community seems to believe the president on this topic. So stop inflaming it by going out and furthering the story. They're furthering the story. The more important point is focus on where there is there. And Senator Rand Paul is right, which is somebody leaked a transcript of General Flynn's comments. That is a crime. Somebody should go to jail for that. That's where they should be focused on,
But the only way to do that, I think you can't move on to other issues in the absence of some kind of retraction, can you?
No, you can't, and he will not do it.
Here's the point. He's not going to do it. He's not going to do it. He's not going to retract it. He's not going to apologize. But at a minimum, stop repeating claims that people now believe to be false.
This is also where I think his staff is not always serving him well, because essentially you always have staff to be there to sort of protect the principle and to be there to find a way to stand down the edges. And in this case, you have a press secretary whose role as press secretary in the White House is you're not speaking for the president as his spokesman. You were seen as a spokesman for the country. So when you were reading these things and claims like about, you know, British intelligence agencies and so forth, they sound like they are being made as policy. And I think that they have really had trouble as a group shifting, because Trump sits there and watches all of these briefings, and they're all doing things for this audience of one as opposed to the broader world.
Meantime, you know that Angela Merkel, Theresa May, and Britain want to get beyond this.
Totally. He's got an agenda in the world which is disruptive, like his agenda at home. They want to come to terms with it. He's been sent by the American people to change things, right? And they're ready to do business with him. Theresa May, in particular, she's kind of on that side of the ledger. Instead, it's like Yik Yak, that high school, social media app where people say, well, I heard somebody said something about him, about her, and they're lost in the weeds of this adolescence out of Washington, so that the primary feeling is not, we don't like the president's agenda, he's president of the American people. We can't deal with this guy.
Well, I think we'll see. I mean, the reality is, for all the noise around his comments and his tweets, is the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, is at a G20 meeting and gets concessions from other countries in terms of the statement. It wasn't a big concession, But
on protectionism.
Yeah, protectionism. Yeah, he had the protectionism language pulled from the communication by the G20. And at a minimum, people still recognize that the United States is the most powerful country in the world, most financially successful, and most importantly has the biggest military.
But people want to respect us. And I was raised to respect the presidency. It would be nice if Donald Trump can respect the presidency. We want the president to be truthful and people to go, I trust what he says. We can't trust him.
I agree the president needs to be truthful. However, having lived through a White House where people said George W. Bush makes the world doesn't respect the United States under George W. Bush, and the Republicans said it under Obama. People of the opposite party always say that.
But the polls in Germany and Britain are demonstrating
that
the sentiment is flipped, and that in fact the White House at this point is a laughingstock.
That's right.
In the capitals of Europe.
This is the risk, is that other countries, our allies, and even non-allies, people are just not, to your point, not going to want to deal with us. That's the phrase that I've heard repeatedly, deal with the U.S.
Even though they have to.
Even though they have to. But there is also the risk for the White House with this, where in terms of the credibility potential crisis, these are all self-inflicted wounds. These are all of their own making. At some point, there will be some actual crisis, and they are going to need the public to believe them, and this is where it becomes a real risk.
That is the key question. I want to move on before we finish to health care as well. Sarah, you saw Dr. Tom Price right there saying you got to look at the whole plan. They're hoping to get Democrats on board. That's not where their problem is right now. It's getting it through the House, and they're going to have to move in a way that's far in the opposite direction where Democrats want to go.
Well, here's the thing. Necessity is the mother of invention. And Republicans, after having campaigned for 7 years on repealing and replacing Obamacare, have to come to terms with a bill that they can get through the House and the Senate. And
but is there one that can get through both? That's what I was trying to ask Price. I mean, to get it through the House, you're going to have to do more Medicaid cuts, speed up the changes in Medicaid. To get it through the Senate, you're going to have to put more money into Medicaid.
I think conservatives in the House, while certainly, you know, having been strongly opposed to the bill, are now saying the right things, which is they're looking at it. They're looking at amendments. And I think here, President Trump deserves some props here.
He's working it hard.
He's working it very hard. He's going to be in Kentucky on Monday. He's working behind the scenes. He's not commenting on individual provisions. I think ultimately Republicans have no choice.
And that's
they
the
have
point.
No choice.
He is working it hard because they know the cost of losing in the House. The president can't lose this.
Right. And he can work it hard as he wants to, but as I'm watching these town halls, I'm thinking about Malcolm X. You've been had, you've been took, you've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. To watch these white working class voters upset and mad, saying, I voted for you, and I'm going, we tried to tell you this is what the man said he was going to do. Now they're faced with the backlash of, now they love the Affordable Care Act, and now Republicans are in a box.
But Terry, they want
the numbers gone up 20 points since last year.
Even though the numbers don't work, they want to believe the president.
They sent him. They sent him to change things. One of the things they wanted to change was Obamacare. Now, the problem for the Republicans is they seem to want a political victory more than a policy victory. They'll do anything to get the repeal part, but it turns out they really don't have a replacement.
You know, and even if it gets through the House, it's going to be a long, long slog in the Senate.
It's going to be a really long slog in the Senate, and you have had a number of Republican senators make clear that this is not, as in current form and even in the shifting form, is still not something that they can be with. They are not going to get Democratic votes on this. The Democratic base is in no mood to compromise. So this is very challenging, but the president does recognize that he is working very hard on this because he does recognize that something has to get passed. To your point, he cannot lose.
I wish we had more time. We don't. We'll be right back.